Israeli airstrikes hit Gaza governorate with casualties reported in Deir al-Balah despite humanitarian warnings. Defense Minister Israel Katz vows no Hamas leaders will have immunity and orders the army to act with full force. And Egypt voices deep concern over Sudan's situation and calls for an immediate ceasefire to protect civilians.
And then, of course, we have the host tonight, and I just want to thank you very much. It was a reason we chose Egypt, because you were very helpful, and very, very helpful. Everybody wanted to have this, but we really thought it was appropriate. And you are a great leader. And he's a fantastic man and a fantastic general, by the way. But he's a great president. And I want to thank Egypt and all of your representatives for treating us all so well. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon and welcome to the first news bulletin of the day. We start with Israeli warplanes striking across all Gaza governorates today, with raids hitting residential areas and sites sheltering displaced families. Local reports from Deir al-Balah cited casualties in Nusayrat camp amid continued bombardment despite humanitarian warnings. Airstrikes were reported in every Gaza governorate, with a home in Nusayrat and tents for displaced civilians among the sites hit. According to Cairo News Channel's correspondent in Deir al-Balah, civil defense teams said families were pulled from the rubble as already displaced residents fled again under fire. Humanitarian agencies warned that the renewed strikes on the densely populated areas risks further mass displacement and medical collapse. Israeli media later quoted an official saying the campaign is nearing completion after dozens of targets were struck. The claims could not be independently verified amid restricted access as aid groups urged immediate protection of civilians and safe corridors for relief. President Donald Trump said the U.S. brokered Gaza ceasefire remains intact despite the deadly Israeli strikes, defending Israel's right to respond to an attack that killed a soldier and warning Hamas for an inevitable end if it defies the peace plan. Speaking on his Asia tour, President Trump reaffirmed that the ceasefire framework stands even as Israel carried out airstrikes following the soldier's death. He defended Israel's right to respond while urging all parties to move towards a lasting settlement, calling Hamas a small part of a larger Middle East deal. Trump said Washington is coordinating with regional and international partners on a binding political roadmap that guarantees Israel's security, expands humanitarian access, and eases Gaza's suffering. He pressed Hamas to comply with the proposal and signaled continued U.S. diplomacy to lock in verification, aid corridors, and follow on arrangements to stabilize the situation.
People say he's very tough, however. We wish we had somebody of a little bit lesser caliber, but they decided not to do it.
Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz barred the international community of the Red Cross from visiting the Palestinian detainees, including Hamas members, citing national security risks under Israel's unlawful combatants law after recommendations from the Shin Bet. Katz signed an order blocking the ICRC access to detainees held under the incarceration of unlawful combatants law, saying the intelligence assessment showed such visits could severely harm Israel's security. His office said the move follows the Shin Bet recommendations and applies across facilities holding Hamas and other detainees designated under the law. The decision suspends a long-standing channel for humanitarian visits and could prompt international pushback over the detainee protections. Israeli officials framed the step as a temporary, and security-driven rights advocates are likely to demand legal clarity, independent monitoring, and family contact alternatives while the order is in force. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz vowed that no Hamas leader will have immunity, ordering the army to act with full force after renewed ceasefire talks and fresh attacks, and saying dozens of commanders were eliminated yesterday. Following renewed ceasefire contacts and strikes in Gaza, the defense minister, Israel Katz, said the Israeli forces have targeted Hamas leadership, claiming dozens of commanders were eliminated in an intensive operation after assaults on soldiers and alleged truce violations. He instructed the military to hit all Hamas targets and warned that anyone breaching the agreement will pay the full price. The remarks signal continued operations alongside diplomacy, with officials framing the pressure as necessary to enforce ceasefire terms and deter further attacks. Independent verification of the battlefield figures remains limited amid access constraints. Egypt has expressed deep concern over the recent developments in Sudan, calling for immediate humanitarian measures and a permanent ceasefire to protect civilians' lives, livelihoods, and national resources. In a statement by the Foreign Ministry, Egypt reaffirmed its full support to help Sudan overcome its current crisis and emphasizes its unwavering commitment to Sudan's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national unity. Egypt strongly rejects any attempts to divide the country or undermine its institutions, underscoring the importance of safeguarding Sudan's stability and preserving its unity. The Arab League has condemned horrific crimes committed against civilians in Sudan's Al-Fashir, calling for an immediate ceasefire to end the city's prolonged siege by the Rapid Support Forces in over 2 years. It urged the urgent and unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid to the region, warning that the escalating situation poses a grave threat to Sudan's stability, unity, and territorial integrity. Kuwait's foreign ministry strongly condemned the Rapid Support Forces for their blatant violations and attacks on unarmed civilians in Sudan's Al-Fashir. In a statement, the foreign ministry reaffirmed Kuwait's call to protect civilians, ensure unimpeded humanitarian aid, and respect international humanitarian law and UN resolutions in line with the 2023 Jeddah declarations. Kuwait reiterated its firm stance, urging an immediate end to the violence and dialogue-based stability. Head of the International Organization for Migration Missions in Sudan, Mohammed Rifat, has revealed that about 33,000 people fled Al-Fashir in Darfur, with 72 hours after the city fell to the Rapid Support Forces. He warned that the number could reach 260,000 soon, describing horrific accounts of starvation, systemic sexual violence, and civilian executions, urging an immediate halt to the attacks. The European Union has condemned the Rapid Support Forces for deliberately targeting civilians in Sudan. The EU called such actions unacceptable and demanded full adherence to the international humanitarian law. France has condemned the Rapid Support Forces for intensifying their attacks on Al-Fashir. The French Foreign Ministry said the siege imposed on the city has created a tragic humanitarian crisis that has persisted for nearly a year and a half. For more analysis, we now move to Rana Al-Assas in our newsroom to Rana.
Thank you so much, Riham. And for more analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Al-Ahram Managing Editor Mohammed Azzuddin. Welcome to Qnews, sir. Sir, how does the Rapid Support Forces control over all 5 Darfur state capitals reshape the balance of power between the Sudanese army and the RSF, both on the military front and politically, sir?
Having me here on Qnews. Of course, this is just unfortunate. What happened was a strategic breach to the control of the land, even though this area, most of it is or belongs to tribes that belong to most of the leaders of the Rapid Support Forces, but keeping the capital, especially Al-Fashir, was a real hit politically, not just on the military level. And so I think this is a deterioration when it comes to the unity of the Sudanese land, and if it keeps going on, this threatens the eastern and northern Sudan. And so the Rapid Support Forces here had a strategic victory, and unfortunately this victory was not just on the military level, but had also on other levels that could threaten the future during the upcoming days and weeks. Of course, it is a deterioration, and since the RSF and the factions following it aren't an actual army, and so the region here right now is fragile and could face chaos, and there will be more atrocities against the Sudanese civilians, and we need international effort to have a ceasefire and to help the civilians and stop the atrocities that are being done.
Sir, in what ways might the fall of Al-Fashir worsen this existing humanitarian crisis in Sudan, and what immediate challenges does this pose for international aid organizations?
The problem has two ways. First one is the organizational level. From the RSF, they are basically a faction, and they had wars in this area before, and so they believe in force and in war, and so this is why we saw over the past few days and the past week, we saw videos and reels that show they are using force and killing the civilians even without war. And then also they raided the medical facilities, and this worsens the humanitarian situation there. Around 15 to 18 million people there are suffering from the war that is happening between the army and the RSF, and hundreds of thousands were displaced. And so the falling of Al-Fashir in the way that we saw, even though it was expected because the surrounding area had the RSF, they were deployed there, and related factions, but it's falling this way and preventing the forces, or not having any measures for the international community to have safe roads so that the civilians can get out of the war zones, makes this so much harder. And we need international effort when it comes to this, and for the RSF to comply to not killing the civilians without wars, even though they are saying this didn't happen.
Sir, how effective has the international community, including the UN and regional actors, been in responding to alleged atrocities and civilian displacement in Sudan's conflict zones?
Unfortunately, this conflict here has been going on since April 2023. after the RSF didn't join the Sudanese army as they promised after the transitional phase, and then d- having their own faces, forces basically, and there were lots of conflict and breaches, great breaches and violations that have happened against the civilians, especially in the civilian institutions and even some roads and bridges. And I don't want to say that there is they don't really care about the cause internationally, but there is so much going on with the world, the Russia-Ukraine conflict and what's happening in Gaza also, and everything that's happening economically too. And so, yeah, on the international level, the Sudanese cause isn't being the focus right now, and they aren't receiving the effort needed that can stop any violations or breaches happening in Sudan. And so the situation needs to be clear for the international community, and we need the RSF to comply to the international organization so that the civilians can get out of war zones and not have them wiped out as we saw over the past few days.
What underlying political, ethnic and economic factors have sustained the conflict between the Sudanese army and the RSF since April 2023, and how might these shape the next phase of the war?
Let me go back a little bit before this date. Before the falling of Bashir administration, he had allowed the formation of some forces outside of the Sudanese army to silence but then we saw genocides in tribes around the Wheel and Darfur especially, and so the leader of the RSF had the trust of al-Bashir, and then when his administration fell out and we had this military group and basically everyone and the Sudanese army supporting the civilians, the RSF were a part of this, but when it came to reality, so that the RSF when it was time for the RSF to join the Sudanese army, they refused that, and they started the military conflict with taking control of specific areas. And because these forces were experienced, they had more arms and so on, but of course in less amount than the Sudanese army. But they have some political objectives and goals and the leader of the RSF also, and he is having genocide basically, and the only casualty here is the Sudanese people, and now the equation is nearing a tie, but actually the RSF are taking over the west, and they have a small area so that they can divide the western areas. If they take over and completely, and then we will have a real crisis in Sudan that will threaten dividing Sudan, and this is condemned by Egypt completely, and they have said that they are standing beside the Sudanese people and any attempts to divide Sudan again. And so the conflict
Sir, I
is
got
political.
your point, and of course Egypt is always on the front line, of course, of any country trying to help. That was Mohammed Izzeddin from Cairo, Al-Ahram managing editor. Thank you very much for joining us in Q News. And now we go back to my dear colleague Rahim Morsi in our studios. Rahim.
Thank you so much, Shona, for that interview. It's very insightful. Moving on to President Donald Trump, that said that the United States stands ready to assist Jamaica after Hurricane Melissa, which made landfall near New Hope. with 185 miles per hour winds before weakening to a Category 3 and moving on to slam Cuba today. Trump's offer came as Jamaica tallied severe damage from the strongest storm on record to hit the island. Officials said St. Elizabeth Parish was underwater, with widespread outages leaving more than 500,000 without power and emergency crews racing to restore access. Melissa roared ashore Tuesday near New Hope with sustained winds around 185 miles an hour, while above a Category 5 threshold, then weakened to a still dangerous Category 3 as it struck Cuba early Wednesday. Relief priorities include search and rescue, medical support, and rapid restoration of electricity and water, with Washington coordinating potential assistance and regional partners mobilizing for debris clearance and shelter operations.
They have to behave. They're on the rough side, but they said they would be good, and if they're good, they're going to be happy, and if they're not good, they're going to be...
Austria will broaden its anti-drone strategy, Defense Minister Claudia Tanner said in Vienna, pledging stronger detection, disruption and defeat capabilities, a shared forum for involved agencies and faster integration with Europe's Sky Shield. Tanner said the Austrian Armed Forces early adopters of the Sky Ranger system will expand layered counter-UAS measures while pushing rapid implementation of the European Sky Shield missile defense project to better protect national airspace. The initiative responds to drone threats that now extend beyond war zones and espionage and sabotage. State Secretary Jörg Leichtfried warned no country is immune, while NEO's leader Yannick Shetty urged cross-border data sharing under European protection programs.
Als österreichisches Bundesheer zu den ersten, die den Sky Ranger angeschafft haben, der im Kampf gegen Drohnen auch eingesetzt werden kann.
British police arrested a 22-year-old Afghan man on suspicion of murder after a West London stabbing that left one man dead and two others injured. Officers disclosed details to counter online misinformation. Police said a 49-year-old man died after Monday evening's attack, while a 45-year-old man sustained life-changing injuries, and a 14-year-old boy was also hurt. The 22-year-old suspect remains in custody. The Home Office said Wednesday the man arrived illegally in a lorry in 2020 and was granted asylum and leave to remain in 2022. Officers stressed the release of suspect information as part of a new strategy to deter rumor-driven unrest following last year's Southport case. The BBC reported that the incident is not being treated as terrorism. Police appealed for witnesses and urged the public to rely on official updates. U.S. President Donald Trump heaped praise on Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi during a visit to the Yokosuka naval base, calling her one of the great prime ministers. Trump and Takaichi arrived at the base aboard Marine One after signing agreements earlier in the day on trade and rare earth cooperation. Yokosuka is home to the USS George Washington, a key part of the U.S. military's regional presence.
Thank you. Going to go down as one of the great prime ministers you watch. Thank you.
Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has praised U.S. President Donald Trump's role in promoting global peace during their meeting in Tokyo, pledging to deepen cooperation between the two allies. Takaichi commended Trump's unwavering commitment to world peace and stability, saying she was deeply impressed and inspired by his efforts. She also outlined her vision to bolster Japan's diplomatic defense and technological capabilities, pledging to strengthen the nation's overall power. In partnership with Washington, the meeting marked Takaichi's first official talks with Trump since taking office, underscoring Tokyo's commitment to maintaining a robust alliance with Washington amid regional security challenges. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has met with the Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi in Tokyo following President Donald Trump's first visit to Japan of his second term. Rubio praised Japan as a major investor in the U.S. economy and emphasized the need to modernize the alliance to face new challenges such as cybersecurity threats, supply chain vulnerabilities, and technological competition. Both sides reaffirmed their commitment to deepening defense, economic, and technological ties as part of a renewed partnership for the 21st century. China's foreign ministry has said that the U.S.-Japan relations and security cooperation should promote regional peace and stability. Spokesperson Gao Jiakun called on Japan to respect the security concerns of its neighbors, reflect on its history of aggression, and pursue a path of peaceful development. Malaysia handed the ASEAN chair to the Philippines as a three-day leaders' summit concluded in Kuala Lumpur, with President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. outlining a 20-year vision and welcoming Timor-Leste as the bloc's 11th member. Calling the October 26th to 28th summit, Malaysia formally transferred the ASEAN chair to the Philippines at the ceremony in Kuala Lumpur. The President, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., told leaders the chairmanship will focus on the association's 20-year outlook, connectivity, and economic resilience, as Timor-Leste was welcomed into the ASEAN. The meetings brought together ASEAN states and dialogue partners, including the United States, China, Japan, and South Korea, for talks on trade, supply chains, and regional security. Analysts say the bloc could help cushion tariff and supply chain shocks, though divergent interests keep some provisions less binding than other regional pacts. Manila will set out detailed chair priorities in the coming weeks.
President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to remain on stage.
Brazil is set to host the world leaders in the Amazon city of Belém for this year's United Nations Climate Summit, running from November 6th to the 21st. According to data from the UN and EU science agencies, global temperatures have already risen by 1.3 to 1.4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Current national policies put the planet on course for around 3.1 degrees of warming by the end of the century, far beyond the Paris Agreement's target to limit heating to 1.5 degrees. The Belém summit, set deep in the world's largest rainforest, is expected to focus on protecting vital ecosystems like the Amazon, seen as key to slowing global climate change. Authorities in India's coastal states of Andhra Pradesh and Odisha intensified evacuations as Cyclone Manta approached, bringing strong winds and heavy rains. Around 50,000 people have already been moved to relief camps on Monday, with schools and colleges closed and holidays for emergency staff cancelled. Disaster teams focused on relocating families from low-lying areas in Andhra Pradesh, where 3.9 million people are expected to be affected, while fishermen in Odisha were warned to stay ashore. The India Meteorological Department said the cyclone could intensify into a severe storm before making landfall. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin, but before we wrap up, here's a recap of the top stories making headlines this hour. Israeli airstrikes hit Gaza governorates with casualties reported in Deir al-Balah despite humanitarian warnings. Defense Minister Israel Katz vows no Hamas leaders will have immunity and orders the army to act with full force. And Egypt voices deep concerns over Sudan's situation and calls for an immediate ceasefire to protect civilians. For more stories and live updates, follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok using the handle @QNewsEGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates.